It is a privilege to be interviewed by YUKO OTOMO for my upcoming CD, World Construct, on ESP Disk with the Matthew Shipp Trio.
So who is starting?
You do, because you're interviewing me.
Oh, I'm interviewing. Okay. It's such a privilege to sit next to you, and it's amazing we know each other for such a long time, and then, I know your career from the beginning. Steve and I always paid attention to what you do, and it's amazing how many times I've seen you play, and then always you're moving on, and then this new album, new CD, you're going somewhere else too, right?
Well, there's always somewhere else to go.
Yes.
I mean, the music potentially is infinite if you have the right equipment to transmit, let infinity flow through you. You always find a different aspect of the music to highlight, and that's what's so important, to keep the language flowing, but to always be looking for new ways to put the sentences and the paragraphs together. Music language is not stagnant. It is a live electrical force. It flows through us, and if there is any way to give yourself over to it, it will always show you like a new aspect of itself. Right. That's a very hard thing to do. I mean, on one level, it's passive, so it's easy. Mm-hmm. But on another level, our enculturation is, and what the things we are entrenched with are so deep and strong that to give yourself over to a simple process is actually the hardest thing to do.
That's exactly true. So I know you practice every day, and then always something new is coming out. But how do you know this is new and I'm going to this direction? Is there any kind of like a moment of inspiration that it awakens you and it feels like, oh yeah, this is the new way?
I think you just gotta stay busy. I don't. There's no angel that knocks at the door and says, right, "This is new. No. Play this." But it's a matter of staying busy and trusting in the process. Mm-hmm. I think the trust in the process allows me, the trio, or whoever, to generate more material, knowing that there's a reason for that material to be generated. That you're not just recycling old riffs.
Right.
I mean, even if somebody is listening and they don't know the language, they might think you're repeating yourself. But to anybody steeped in the language, they know that this product of today is somewhat different than that product of yesterday, for whatever reasons. I always feel that if I keep my brain, my spirit, and my hands close to the instrument, you're always into something a little different. Mm-hmm. The phrasing's a little different. Mm-hmm. The articulation's a little different. Yes. The emphasis is a little different. The coloring's a little different. So it's just a matter of just keeping busy and keeping your hands and spirit in it, and just keep moving on. And
right.
the language being a live force, it will show you a different face.
Yes, actually, it's very good. That's really like when any artist find where they're walking, and then whatever the new spirit comes in, and you are trained enough to go on walking on your path, and also when something new started to happen, your mind is already so matured, and you're so kind of in tune with what's happening, so you can pick up right away, and then right. You can just develop into that kind of thing. And as you said, it's like any art, like music, it's there, and then even abstract art is the same. It's like it emerges out of you as you go through the process, and then you realize, yeah, this is the one. I've never seen it in my own work before.
Well, there's times I don't realize it. I mean, there's times we'll be in the studio and you're just not sure, but you listen back, other people might listen to it, and something that you might resist because it is actually kind of a new phase.
Right.
There's like, no, this is really good. This is like something fresh, and it's funny how your own mind can trick you either way. Like one of the best things you might do, you might be the most resistant
Exactly,
to it
that's true.
at
Yes.
first because it just, it's a slightly different face of yours, and you're used to looking in the mirror and seeing a certain look, and this might
Right.
be a slightly.
That's one of the most important factor of being a great artist, because, of course, you technically you practice and theoretically you go on with your mind and all those things. But this one almost like a subjective, objective awareness of what's happening. It's like another self watching what you're doing,
Right.
and then exactly that's the moment and that's the way something started to happen.
Right.
Your mind captures that particular shift or change.
Right.
But some people don't practice enough or don't live on the same path like you do long enough, so they haven't developed that particular part of the mind.
Right, right.
So that's one of the most difficult things, because people only think about technically how do you do this and that, but this one of the kind of like I don't know how to describe, but it's a subjective, objective in one, your awareness.
Right. Well, I can't technically think about anything as far as what the jazz language is supposed to be about, because to me, on a certain level, and I love jazz of all types, and I love hearing people play straight ahead jazz well, but on another level, the language of jazz is how can I put this? Waste product.
What
Well, no, I mean,
anything
anything is. I mean, language is.
I kind of understand, because
Right.
the abstract art is the same.
Right.
Like a certain kind of geometric abstract art, and people still go on with the certain styles.
Right.
But in a way, it's a kind of waste.
Right,
Because it already happened.
Well, yeah, it already happened, and it's just like I have I have no problem with doing something that already happened if the context that is being done is
Yeah.
fresh. Like, who am I to if somebody sits down and they play a really simple folk song with triads and they're really feeling it, it's coming from the depths of their being, and it's how they express themselves. Who am I to say anything about that? Yeah. But once you get involved with, say, playing jazz, and there's a consciousness of technically playing jazz right, then that's wrong. Unless you're a student and that's all unless that's all you know,
Yeah.
and you're just trying to learn. Okay, that's one thing. But as far as putting jazz out here in the world, who cares about playing jazz? Who cares about any of it? It's so meaningless.
I know
and so
you always
pointless.
have I understand that you have such a legitimate resistance toward the labeling. You don't like to be called jazz
Right.
musicians.
Well, I don't care what people call me.
Yes.
To be honest, I mean, I'm just doing what I do,
Yeah.
and I put some language out here, and if you listen to it, you're free to accept it or reject it. I mean, that's
The few things I always respect you is like like any other art, writing or visual art or music or anything, once you kind of create your own style, which you already have, and then people become like a cookie cutter, a stylist, and then they just stay with the signature style. So because that's how people recognize your art, and that's what so-called sell. So they just fall into that signature style and they polish that art. But you're completely different, because you're always like your awareness of being in this universe, cosmic kind of consciousness, is very quite intense. It's not just a rhetoric.
right. Well, no, it's not rhetoric.
no,
I
know.
mean, I don't mean to pat myself on the back,
Yeah.
but I'm not on a path. I am the path. That I'm not on a path. I am the path.
Right.
That
Yes.
I'm on.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
I will arrogantly say that to my biggest detractors, if they want to contest
Yeah.
that comment, I defy them to
It's actually very. You said one of the most important things. I don't own the past. you're
I'm not
on
on
the
it.
path.
No,
Yeah,
I am
I
it.
know.
Yeah.
That's actually if there's a Zen master here, they would say that's good.
But I arrogantly assert that
Yeah.
without any qualms, and if anybody wants to have issue with like somebody saying that, I defy them. But anyway, that's not the point. Is I love the jazz language, and I think it's a beautiful language, and I think that there's all kinds of applications of it. People making, and the beauty of this universe is that there are so many points of views and so many different ways of doing things, and so many different people doing things in different ways. I don't necessarily think my way is the right way. It's the right way for me.
I agree totally.
And it's my way of putting myself out here in the world. I do think that once anybody comes dogmatic about the jazz language or anything, then it becomes difficult. I mean, there's a difficulty.
It kills the organic spirit.
Exactly.
Yes.
It just kills it. It
Yes.
suffocates it.
That happens with any art,
Right.
Or not just art, any lifestyle,
Right.
anything. It just kills.
It just kills
right.
it. Which is my problem with certain like kind of famous jazz musicians who talk about the blues all the time. Like, who cares? I mean, like, once you talk about the blues, it's over. Like, if somebody has to talk about the blues, then like the blues is not in there. Who cares? I mean, who cares? Like, who cares about
You already
any of that?
have it, and so you don't have to talk about
if
it.
if you had it, you wouldn't even think about like writing an essay about it or talking about it. Or the blues, who cares?
Yeah.
And it doesn't make you black; it makes you stupid. No, I mean there's a lot of black kind of pimps in jazz that talk about the blues like it gives them some validation, and they just sound like pimps, like
That's quite intense.
trying to make
Some people will hate you.
I don't care. I mean, I'd rather hear like some white cat in a punk band who can't even play his instrument get up and play something than like some creep like trying to think that they're valid because they can throw a word around the blues. Like if you could really, I don't recall hearing Muddy Waters like trying to justify
That's right.
what
I
he
know.
does.
Yes,
They just
yes.
do what they do, and that's why they're great.
Yes, actually,
So-
for me, like I always talk about this with other people too. Jazz is one of it's an rooted in American history, American culture. Everything came out of America's complicated history of this, lots of things. But America itself doesn't really acknowledge jazz as a so-called national treasure level accomplishment coming out of the history. And also, jazz is one of the most universal music art form and the most democratic art form. So not just the beauty and the enjoyment, pleasure of listening to jazz in a audio level. I really think so-called, whatever the music, I shouldn't use the word jazz, but whatever the music you are involved is very important for me because of the universality.
Right.
That means it has not, of course it comes out of the black struggle, all those things. That was part of it, definitely, major part. So some people want to insist on talking about blues, but that was more like a kind of like a making haiku as a Japanese stuff, because it's the same kind of like a pulling back to the nationalism and narrow-minded racial stuff instead of making it universal and more open.
Right. Well, I just think that once any artist is trying to so tightly define themselves, that's basically at the end of the day, I do what I do, and I'm speaking for myself. I sit down at a piano, I push notes down. Why do I push what I do down? Because whatever my talent is, it leads me to push those notes down. Whatever things I imbibed and grew up in, kind of framed me a certain way. And at the end of the day, I'm trying to just express something in a universal language,
Yes.
Period.
And it's the most amazing thing about is your case and the real true universal language always comes out of the true individual, very special, private level place,
Right.
only through you. So it's a really individualistic thing, personal. But if you really go through this path of being an individual, it always reaches to the universal level.
Well, it is very individual. I mean, certain people, certain places at certain times are just going to bump into something.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with any agenda. And at the end of the day, some lone guys somewhere is just, going to bump into some language, because a language is an electric live force.
Actually, Steve wrote the poem, Language is an Organism.
Right. Yeah, well, it is.
It is.
It
I
is.
know.
And it's like it just goes through whoever it decides to go through at a certain point. But the person is not going to go through. It's
Right.
somebody sitting at a university spouting off some stuff, or somebody with a political agenda. The language is beyond those agendas. It's beyond
Language is, in a way, beyond words.
Right. It's beyond the academy.
Yeah.
It's beyond schools.
Yes.
It's beyond all that. It's just like an electrical force in the universe. And I'm not going to even make any claims for what I do.
No,
I'm trying to just be honest. And
your attitude is like, it's very, I always say Matthew Shipp is like a very much Zen and Tao, in a way, Taoism, Taoism,
Right.
because the way you just pursue whatever you're pursuing with complete concentration and openness to the universe and awareness of your individuality. It's always like a moving, a path,
Right.
which is, and then like you already said, that I don't own the past. I am in the past, and I am, so that kind of humbleness.
Well, that's actually not humble.
Oh, no,
really,
but that's, in a way,
Right.
it's an intense self-confidence.
Right.
Yes. Without that,
Yeah.
you wouldn't be that humble.
Right.
And where does self-confidence come from? Amazing input and giving devotion to what you do, what you are.
Right.
And can you imagine how many hours you gave to this pianist life of your life,
Well, that is very well.
Since you were a kid.
Yeah, my whole life.
Can you imagine?
But anyway, it's funny you mentioned Taoism and Zen, because I grew up very Christian. I grew up.
Right. You wanted to be a priest.
Yeah, I grew up in an Episcopalian family. Went to a Catholic school. But I discovered, I still consider myself a mystical
Right.
Christian, even though I don't believe in an anthropomorphic God. I do not consider myself an atheist, even though I don't believe in a Mr. God up there. I do not consider myself an atheist. So I can, because I believe in energy and language and information that is alive. I believe that those things are alive in consciousness. So and that they generate space time. So the quest in the music is the same religious quest as, if you're trying to figure out what all this life is about. I discovered Taoism and Buddhism as a teen. Well, with Buddhism, I read Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha.
Right, I know.
And that book changed my life.
Yes.
And then I started reading Alan Watts, who I have some problems with nowadays.
It's so interesting.
But his writing on Taoism just got me into the Tao Te Ching, which that book really changed my life. And I don't consider myself a Taoist. I actually don't consider myself a Christian. I don't consider myself.
No.
I'm a nothing.
Yes,
I am a nothing. I just exist.
You learn everything from every source which is available to you, and then everything becomes a nutrition of who you are. So
Right.
I would never call you a Zen something or Taoist or none of. You have you reach to the same level of philosophical understanding of the reality,
Right, right.
which is
No,
very rare.
I mean, I do my music, and I'm nothing that does
Yeah.
the music. Whatever that thing I do when I sit at the piano. I was just finding kind of. I mean, you obviously understand a lot more about Japanese culture than I do. There is a and I said I had problems with Alan Watts. It has nothing to do. He's a beautiful writer, and his stuff reads so easy. You know, it's kind of like drinking a cool drink on a hot day.
Right.
But it's just so funny. There's a lot of Zen kind of organizations that study Zen, and like they all have problems with this guy or that guy or that guy. But what's so interesting to me is like, how could anybody situate themselves to have problems with it? Because if you really or Zen, you know you can't really.
I know any religious organizations, even Zen, everything.
Which is not a religion.
I know.
Right.
Yes, I know. And then the sudden corruption once
once it gets institutionalized.
Completely. So that's why since I was a kid, I really hated any kind of institutionalized, theorized world. I was always against. And so, when we met each other, like we really had a natural affinity to who we are. When you came to New York, and Steve and we all became friends, and we didn't have to explain why we are friends.
Right. Could I just say something in case anybody watching this?
Yes.
Because you keep mentioning Steve. Yuko's husband was Steve Delachinsky, a great poet and jazz enthusiast and a jazz writer. So we were all very.
He should be here. He should be talking. He should be interviewing and torturing Matthew.
Oh, we were very close, and we tortured each other.
Yes,
that would not be good if he was on YouTube. If Steve was interviewing.
But anyway, so it's incredible how our friendship as just humans, and also our friendship as a creative beings, it's like always such a natural parallel merging of energy and spirit. And
can I ask you a question? Yeah. Since you're talking about the once something gets institutionalized, how it gets kind of degraded. Derek Bailey once said something about really early bebop that I thought was really interesting. And Derek Bailey, to anybody that doesn't know, was an improvisational guitarist who basically did completely free improv. He would never, even though he started out his career as a studio musician, and he kind of got to
influenced so many people.
Right. Yeah. But he once said about early bebop that they always, and he used I can't remember the exact image, but it was something like in the Carlos Castaneda books where Don Juan, Carlos's teacher, always talked about jumping off a cliff, and then the abyss would open up, and something would always enter where you wouldn't just fall down and kill yourself. You would enter another world, but you had enough faith just to jump off the cliff. And Derek Bailey made some comment about that they always see Charlie Parker and all those guys at the beginning of bebop always seemed like they were jumping off the cliff, but like there was always some safety net opened up. I don't remember exactly how he phrased it, but that's what I got out of the image he used. And I always found that interesting because to me, early bebop is in some ways some of the freshest music ever done, some of the most original.
I totally agree.
And some of the most free music.
I totally agree.
Ever. And there's something that early bebop had that nothing ever. I mean,
especially it's not even a structural innovation or theoretical innovation, but the spirit itself, the sound, the spirit is so urgent, so alive, and so organic.
Otherworldly.
Yeah.
And I don't think anything has ever captured that. I mean, I don't think Beethoven captured that.
I love Beethoven.
No, I do too. But I'm saying I don't think free jazz has actually possibly captured what the beginning of bebop had. The very beginning of it.
I totally agree because the spirit. When I listen to music, it's not just a sound, effect on my head or anything. I love to see if the spirit is alive or not.
Right.
You know, your case is always alive. Some musicians.
Yeah, but I don't think
I know,
on
but-
in a overall cultural paradigm, I don't think I'm involved with something
Yes,
that's captured.
because then, like when Bebop happened, it's like the Kerouac and Beat Generation was happening, abstract expressionism was happening. American culture was a height of shift,
Right.
and it's all about accumulated, racial, problems and society's problems. And after the war, something started to really click into the completely different place, and then it was a real explosion.
It was
Yeah,
I mean, it came out of
So
nowhere
one
too.
thing I always love to acknowledge in any kind of music or any art is the certain urgency.
Right.
Because now, these days we don't have too much sense of urgency in the art. It's neatly done and well practiced, but then the bebop, not just how they moved the notes and other things, but the spirit was there in the sound.
It's otherworldly.
It's amazing.
It's just something. I mean, it's something like that. I would say early bebop is something that just truly has never been done on the planet Earth.
I agree.
Like it just is its own
Yes, I agree.
kind of, and there's no getting. I mean, I've read I don't really read musicologists as far as how they try to analyze that period. I've done very little reading up on it, but I do know, for instance, when I read about Charlie Parker, that nobody's actually ever got to the bottom of like what happened or how he got the eureka that he got to allow him to flower in the language that he flowered in at that period. Nobody's ever figured it out.
Incredible.
I mean, it's just an utter enigma. And the more you study it, the more of an enigma it becomes.
In the visual art, Cubism was really like a turning point.
Right.
For every concept of old and new, right? So I always think, people don't talk about it, but the bebop for me is like a Cubist revolution. It's like completely, you change how you hear music, how you perceive, why you play. Everything was like, if there is a word revolutionary music,
right.
That was a real.
No, that was a true revolution.
And occasionally I listen to Charlie Parker and all. It's like I said, this is still so avant-garde.
Right. No. I mean, Charlie Parker is a.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting that somebody can be so messed up, but in that area of their life,
because
they're such an open vessel to what flows through, an unimpeded open vessel.
Yeah, I know why he was messed up, because he was such a brilliant genius, but the whole world was completely against him, and he was doing something like falling into this, jumping off the cliff and going to the abyss.
Right.
It's like they are really in a completely unknown territory.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I actually don't buy into the idea that society made him. I mean, I believe that he was a messed up person.
It was. But there's so much reason.
Right.
So many reasons why he was messed up.
I don't think society made him a
a
heroin addict.
Yeah.
I think he made himself. But that's my opinion.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of extremely brilliant Black people from that area who did not end up heroin.
Yeah, that's yes.
And I think that was his own personal demons and personality defect. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
But anyway, I still think that I understand what Derek Bailey meant by that, and that segment of the language was truly like a revolutionary thing that changed world history. I mean,
Totally.
So, and I find it interesting that your husband, Steve Delachinsky, by some people, and I don't consider him a modern beat poet. I don't consider him a jazz poet either.
No, I know. He hated it because, people know Steve as because he's a music guy, jazz guy. But, I'm going through this archival process of taking care of Steve's poetry and stuff. He was really in every field.
Yeah. He was just a New York personality.
Yes, I know. He was a brilliant guy.
Right.
And the more I read, I kind of knew most of his poems, but the more I read into his work, I am really moved that how brilliant he was. And, so the labeling is one of the worst things. Yes, yeah.
Right. Well,
I'm
calling
sorry,
him a beat poet is
derailed.
like calling me a free jazz musician.
Yes,
You know?
yeah, I know. Now,
Yeah.
but free jazz is a cool thing. The younger generation was to know more about free jazz. So Steve has a book of this Charles Gayle, Final Night book.
Right.
Now, younger generation wants to read them, so they're going to republish.
Right.
Yeah, so, whatever it is.
And to anybody who sees this that doesn't know who Charles Gayle is, is a really great. He's a older man who's of the same generation as Albert Ayler and those people, but he did not get kind of known into the late '80s, early '90s, and he was on the New York scene for quite a few years, playing what's known as free jazz at the highest level.
Yes, we followed him everywhere.
And Steve and YUKO used to go to every one of his gigs.
Of people, right?
Before he was even named, before he was even known, and he kind of had a cult following that did follow him everywhere. It was like
a cult, yes.
And then he had kind of a claim. There was a big Village Voice article by Francis Davis about him. I don't remember if that was in the early '90s, I think. And then for a while, he kind of was becoming, a name in the jazz world, but he always fought against that himself.
Yes.
He just wasn't comfortable.
Actually, it's so funny because, I still remember the first article. I kept the magazine. The first article somebody wrote about you, power of pressing is still very, strong in the world because most of the people just read the media informations and they just started to get involved because for some reason, this kind of music, most of the so-called regular people are totally kind of like detached from the reality you live in. And then,
Which reality then?
No, your art. And so Francis Davis wrote something and we saw the power of press in such a way because the place was...
Oh, yeah, when the first article on Charles Gayle, Charles the next week
the day
played...
and night.
Right. I mean, before that, there was kind of a cult following of a few people going to his gigs. And after that first big article, I was at that concert.
Right.
The next week, it was packed.
But the Charles never changed. We didn't change. But the word just followed up.
Right.
Only because some famous critic wrote something great. He must be great. That's how it goes. Everything, the books... art shows, music, everything is always, still so sad because general audience is still not connected with this reality. That's what I mean.
But then how they're supposed to know about it.
I know. That's very
right.
true.
Because there's people are doing their own own lives, trying to pay their rent and stuff or whatever. I was really struck by having known Charles all these years, and your and Steve's dedication to coming out and hearing all the artists that you really admire, and hearing them on a regular basis and seeing how their language.
Yeah. I was very lucky because I already started listening to so-called basic jazz when I was in Japan.
Right.
But Steve was my major mentor, and he was already so involved with music since he was a kid. So he was a great teacher, and the environment I jumped in when I moved to New York was like incredible, amazing. So much things are happening in the 80s and 90s,
right?
And the early 2000s. You are part of it too. You came in the.
I came to New York at the end of '83.
Yes, I know, and then we saw all your kind of like a maturity and as a creator, and also maturity as a performer on the stage, because you used to be so shy.
I'm shy?
Yeah, you are. Well, I still remember it was.
No, I was shy.
Greenwich House. You had a solo or something.
Right.
And then you just walked to the piano and you played and you just bow and you left without talking or anything. But now, at least you can say, I'm Matthew Shipp. But
at least I give that much information.
But
no, well, I don't believe in really engaging an audience verbally because I don't like the music. I play, and when you hear, if you come to hear me play, you're going to hear what I have to say in the music. And there's not much about me that I find interesting enough to, I'm a pretty simple person. I mean,
I know.
I basically am, in a lot of ways, average sane person in some way. Maybe, I mean, my wife would say, no, you're not sane. But I consider myself an average sane person and pretty boring in some ways. But I don't really believe in engaging the audience. It's funny. I played it with my string trio once, a festival in Maine, and Charles Lloyd played a duo the night before. Charles Lloyd, and I was there. Because I was actually teaching at a arts camp there. Why I was teaching aesthetics course, lectures, a series of lectures on aesthetics
to the kids.
There were adults in this camp. Yes. So I was there for a week. So I went to the festival the few nights before I played, and Charles Lloyd did a duo the night before I played with Jason Moran, and he talked a lot and engaged the audience and told stories and stuff so I did my gig the next night with my string trio, and I think I might have introduced the band, with the Matthew Shipp String Trio. This is, good night, thank you for coming, whatever, and got off stage. So I was talking to somebody from the festival, and I was just saying, there were a lot of older people at the gig, and I said, a lot of them, I assume, go because it's the jazz festival, and they don't really know the performers. And I was just asking them, were there any older people like that came that I might have freaked them out? They didn't know what to expect, and they said no. It was a really good response. They said there was one guy though that called and complained on the answering machine, and he complained that.
How did he complain?
Well, he said I didn't talk to the audience at all or anything, and he was just really put off by how it was just I just played and left, and he was just and he said that Charles Lloyd had entertained and talked to the audience, and I said, well, what you can say to that guy, you can tell him to go kiss me where the sun don't shine. I said, basically tell him from me, F you, I don't talk to the audience. If you don't like it, tough, I mean, it's just not me. I don't really have anything to say, and I don't have any, the language that you hear during the performance is it. Again, if you get something out of it, beautiful. I've been able to share. I consider the audience as much a part of the music as I am, because they're kind of quote creators. Right. If you look at it in a quantum physics way.
That's actually. Do you know who said that? Matt Maneri's father.
Oh, Joe Maneri.
Yeah, Joe Maneri
said
that in Tonic. I still clearly remember. He was talking to us. We are in the audience, and he said, you are another instrument. I said, what does it mean? And then he explained, because of your vibration, our spirit, everything changes. Because of your presence as an instrument, we create this music. So you are another instrument.
Well, it's very true.
Yeah.
And, I really, but again, if somebody is there and they have a problem with it, that's their problem. It's not my problem, So, I couldn't give a rat's ass, And I don't talk to the audience for that reason. I mean, I don't share anything with them other than the music. I don't have anything to say other than the music.
For a painter or, writer, we write, and everything we make a scratch or mark or anything, it just stays in the paper.
Right.
Even the words. But the musicians, when you play in the concert, it just disappears.
As Eric Dolphy said.
Right, I know, exactly, like Eric Dolphy said. So do you sometimes have it's too bad this was recorded, not all of them recorded, right?
I mean, lots of gigs aren't recorded.
Right, I know. So, and sometimes you feel like, this
no,
is
I don't have. I mean, it's what it is. So if something's great and it's not recorded, there's nothing I can do about it. So why even waste any energy?
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, it's just I'm sure there's plenty of hours that are just in the ether now that were worthy of being recorded, but they weren't. and that's that.
Yeah, it's interesting because we just talked about how this music is a universal art form, and then going back to Joe Maneri's audience as an instrument. But that's true though, because whenever Stones, Steve, myself, and few people, you listening to you or even Charles, or whenever something really hits, we are all different people. We're sitting on a different place. We knew exactly where it happened.
Right, right.
It's very amazing how audience has its own universality ability to acknowledge the best part of the music.
Well, especially as Brian Jason, William Burroughs' sidekick, talked about the third mind.
Yeah.
The gestalt that happens.
Yes. It's really...
Especially if it's a group of dedicated listeners that go to hear.
Yes, it's really amazing. I experienced so many times that, wow, there is a universal kind of thing happening in this space, And it's really... That makes... Whenever I experience something like that, it really gives me a real hope. Because I'm really interested... Why I do abstraction? I'm basically a very... almost a classic abstract artist thing, and I'm into Utopian Universality because Mondrian and all those people, they are not just painting for painting's sake. They are experimenting social experience.
Right.
Yeah. So I am really involved with this. I want to prove that we have something kind of common thread, all of us. Not just human, living creatures.
Right.
So for me, it's very important to have that experience of as a listener, to have the common thread among us who are not connected,
Right.
Yeah, it's...
Now, YUKO has done the artwork for my upcoming trio album, World Construct. She's done artwork for quite a few of my earlier albums.
Right. Because I don't show my artwork, because I'm more known as a so-called poet and a writer. But I was invited to do lots of cover art for many different musicians. But Matthew Shipp, I did the most, and I always enjoy it. And then one of your early work, Point and Zoe.
Right.
Yeah, I know. It's such a joy to work with him, and yeah.
Well, when you talk about the universality of language, that's why I was talking earlier about getting indigestion when I had to deal with anybody who has any dogmatic ideas about what jazz language denotes. Because to me, as a jazz musician, and this is me speaking for myself, I just want to put language out there that's expressive of the vibrations going through my head. So that means if I was talking about how I admire Charlie Parker and those people for tapping into whatever it is that they tapped into that allowed that type of organic revolutionary zeal that was in their music when it originally came out, and it has that palpable sense of just I don't know how to describe it. But I just want to say I'm always aiming for, when you hear me play, that what you're basically hearing is an energy field, a mind, or if you want to talk about how an energy field is coalesced into physical form or brain, that's just pushing at the instrument. So therefore, any superficial aspects of what you consider jazz, or even what you consider classical music, or what you consider free jazz, are pointless. It's the energy configurations that are behind that assume these forms, that temporarily assume these forms.
That's what I call abstraction.
That to me are important, because I'm and if a phrase comes out and it takes you to a resonance that reminds you of Albert Ayler, so be it, or it takes you to a resonance that reminds you of Bud Powell, or it takes you to a resonance that reminds you of Willie the Lion Smith, or it takes you to a resonance that reminds you of Debussy or Chopin, so be it. It's all just energy and language, and like the rhetoric that was thrown around about this music in the 80s and 90s by certain people is just so like meaningless. You know, I mean, Albert.
Because what we want to do is that we want to open up.
Right.
We want other people to open up. So we will really hear something we don't recognize, but we're hearing almost in the same telepathic level. And the reason why I really enjoy great musicians like you and some of the great musicians, because it's really incredible. It's like a miraculous effect on my brain, because I can't open up that part of my brain without listening to you. So when I listen
or whoever.
Yeah, whoever, yeah.
Right.
Whoever great, really involved with breaking up some, mode and going to some different space and time. It's such an amazing, it's like taking a pill or medicine or something. It's like, wow.
Well, that's what, there's a couple things with that. We are physicians of the muse. A musician is
right, a muse, right.
As William Parker always says, is a physician of the muse.
Right.
So it is like giving medication or massaging the skull.
Yes, massaging
to open up new neural
or
pathways.
knocking the pot
right.
open.
I mean, it is about opening up new neural pathways.
It's
to
really
experience.
incredible. So
at the same time, I'm going to say this: there's so many different people and so many different paths that I can't. That somebody's path out here might be to play swing music in a very classical way. There's a place for there's a time and a place for everything on this planet. And that might be somebody's true path, what they truly understand, what they're truly kind of built to do. There's people that are built to be professional wrestlers. I'm not one of them. You can just look at my friend.
I totally understand.
So, I mean, there's a time and a place for everything. And, all I can ask as a creative artist who's making a living at doing what I do and trying to, quote, find a place in the world is to be given the freedom to be who I am and not have people try to crap on me for doing that, which to some extent I've been successful at. But I definitely take what William Parker, the great bass player, says, that we are physicians of the muse. I take that very as musicians.
Right. Albert Ayler said the same thing.
Yeah. And Albert Ayler to me is an angel.
Yeah.
He's one of the most, despite, he, like Charlie Parker, had a lot of problems also. But that aspect of their life that was focused in the music is an unencumbered and clear channel to the principles that they
It's amazing.
embody.
They live so short on this earth.
Right.
They're so young. They're kids when you think about it,
And 34.
Right, and that's
Charlie
nothing.
Parker.
And they just came
And left.
Yeah, and did something, but they left so much gift for all of us to really enjoy. That's like I always think about. You once you posted something about Chopin. I thank Chopin to be born, and he was here and left the whole on Facebook or something, right?
I remember posting something about Chopin.
Whatever. But anyway, I always think about those people just came to this world and they did whatever they needed to do, and they just left like boom. But they left so much for generation to generation, internationally. Everything is like we have so much gift given by them.
Right.
So, it's like incredible stuff. Yes.
Yes. I mean, Albert Ayler basically was unencumbered by a lot of cultural baggage that a lot of artists are. He was really able to get to a very specific thing very quickly. It's something that, like, in the free jazz idiom, like Coltrane couldn't just break there. I mean, I'm not trying to denigrate any of Coltrane's great work that is on the highest level, but I'm just saying, as far as like spiritual unity, that took somebody who really had no baggage whatsoever to be able
Yes.
to do an album of that.
Different kind of true sense of freedom,
Right.
right?
I don't even know if freedom is the right word because freedom to me denotes like trying to become free.
Right, right.
And I don't know if
Actually, it's so interesting. In Japanese, freedom is a completely Chinese and Japanese written in a completely different thing, and it's freedom in Japanese and or it's in Chinese character, but means self. It's like everything becomes right because of its own self motivation.
right.
Yeah, so that's what it is. It's nothing to do from free from something. There's
Right.
no
And that's
from.
that's exactly
Right,
my
yes.
point. And that is so
that's
important.
what I meant.
That is
Yes.
so important.
I know. That's what we are trying to do.
Right. Because language is language, right?
Yeah.
Once you get, once you get caught up, especially like the framework that
Yes.
in order to play free jazz, you had to be able to play like straight ahead jazz. And that, okay, now I'm somebody that was a straight ahead jazz player as a teenager, but I don't subscribe to, I subscribe that there's a time and place where that might be true. But at the same time, like, who's to say that somebody is walking in a field, gets hit by lightning, and is then, for whatever reason, their mind's restructured, and they might be open to a stream of language that has as much mathematical validity as anything ever created, and that they can just pick up a sax and do that. Who's to say?
Yes. Actually, you used the word angel for Albert Ayler, but
Right.
I started to believe in angelic existence, and some of people are like, they stayed on this earth so short, and they did whatever the important job, and they just left. Like, for me, they're like angels.
Right. Well, they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
If my sense of an angel is light, and not visible light,
Right.
but something beyond the spectrum, a photon, maybe a particle of light, or as some like Albert Ayler is a light to humanity, and it's at least in the focus flow of what he did when he picked up the saxophone. Forget the rest of their lives, whatever problems they had. Or delusions, because he had a lot of delusions. He was crazy. To my way of seeing it. But apart from that, when they picked up their instrument, somebody like Charlie Parker, they were able to channel a stream of light.
It's
a
amazing.
stream of language, and nobody knows why. And there's no getting to it. Also, you can do all the study. You're never going to figure out exactly what happened. You might hear the myth.
It's like they really opened the kind of dimensional kind of door to go to the different dimension.
Yeah, and why them?
Yeah.
Nobody knows how it came together.
Yeah,
their
what happened.
You can study all they practiced. You can know that Charlie Parker learned all these Lester Young solos. And you'll still never get to the bottom of why he was that guy that I think Joe Jones did the cymbal when he sounded like crap at it. And then he went, whether there's exact truth to that legend that he went to the cabin and practiced all day for 3 months. Yeah. And then came back. However the myth is, I don't know.
I always feel like, even with all those programs, Charlie Parker, heroin and stuff, but I really believe that he really knew what was happening.
On a certain level, he obviously...
As a creator, he was very aware of what he was doing.
Yeah, I believe.
Completely.
Yeah, I don't believe it was not.
It's not shaky.
I don't believe it was an idiot savant thing.
No.
I believe that there were aspects of autism or idiot savantism that entered into the. This is my belief that there was a mixture of downright pragmatic awareness and understanding of the process that allowed him to structure a practice routine that got him there. And at the same time, there was a aspect of openness and idiot savantism and maybe even autism that helped open up the way too. Yes. And that in a case like his, maybe there was the perfect balance of all of that.
Idiot savant, it's very fascinating because in Zen world, to be an idiot is one of the most important things.
Right.
Yeah, so like Daisetsu Suzuki, he's, Daisetsu, and there's so many great Zen master has idiot in the name.
Right.
It's very amazing. Yeah. So to be an idiot is one of the major reasons.
Well, I mean, it's one of the major things. There has to be. I mean, there has to be a part of your brain.
Because so you can be totally away from the so-called worldly
Right.
stuff, and then you can really see something most of 99.99% of the people cannot see.
Right, exactly. There has to be a part of your brain that can operate, that can structure a practice routine. Because if you're doing an artist, if you're an artist of any sort, you had to know how to go about gathering materials. But then there has to be a part of your brain that truly is an idiot, and then have faith in the idiot. You have to have faith because all of this, everything is generated by faith. There's not a thing here. You go to the store, you give somebody a dollar bill. The only reason money has any currency is because we all have faith in the system.
Yes,
I mean, it's just a piece of green paper.
Isn't that funny?
So
Yes.
I mean, so at the end of the day, like faith, and so you had to
I
have.
think about faith a lot.
Right. You had to have faith that you're an idiot, and you had to trust that being an idiot is right. That the entrenched cultural ways are aspects of language that might have been good for a while for whatever reason, but they're to be discarded like yesterday's trash in some ways. I mean, there's. And even if they have their use or they have their historical meaning, you had to be, and what that's what gets to be an artist. How are you supposed to trust your own instincts?
That's what I meant by, you have to have a certain, not just technical stuff or creative stuff, but you have to really train and develop one part of the mind in a completely different dimension that always watching you doing everything, and then said, yes, that's fine, and then just keep on doing. That's I don't know what it is. It's some kind of awareness,
Right. Well, it's
but you cannot make it up.
No, you can't. It's a balancing act, and I mean, we all have voices in our heads that were put there from the time you're a kid. Mm-hmm. Teachers, critics, and by critics I don't mean professional critics that criticize, that write about the arts. I'm talking about just people in general. I mean, it's just like with the instinct of where you're willing to put yourself out there, do your thing, and just trust the process is very fragile. And
that's the hardest part.
And the other thing is, there's a lot of delusions that can come with that too.
And so many people want you to not to believe you.
Well, that's the whole world.
Yes, that's the whole world. I know.
Right. I mean, the whole world.
But that's why I'm kind of like Steve called me idiot savant too. I called him an idiot savant also. Anyway, but I always feel like whatever I'm doing or you're doing, it is really, in a way, it's a very revolutionary things to do. Not becoming so-called political in a mundane level, but we are really trying to challenge the normal thinking, which is not really correct.
I mean, nothing. Okay, my reaction to this is that I've always been believing that artists or anybody should understand their motivations. So I was going to say, like, I don't know my motivations. I don't understand them, and there's there's an aspect of that that's true, but it's also partially a lie because I've always been one to be very deep into self-examination. But the other point, I'm just a dude out here pushing notes down on a piano. I mean, there on another level.
I'm just doodling.
Right? Yeah, there's a mechanical
I'm like a master of doodling.
There's a mechanical thing called a piano. There's somebody cut a tree down and took ivory and made notes, and it's sitting there, and I go,
it's amazing,
and push notes down.
Somebody made it.
Now, when I have lots of albums out, there's a whole complex quote language has been developed. So you're going to say that's all there is to it. You're some dude that makes this mechanical thing that somebody called a piano come alive, and yes, the universe is very complex, but it's very simple at the same time.
It's the same thing. I once wrote a poem about, I think that was Caravaggio's painting or something. And I basic concept of the poem was, I am so mesmerized at this just a fabric, it's a canvas or whatever the material, and the paint just made this magic.
Right.
How metamorphizing the whole thing. So the music's the same. The piano is a mechanical instrument.
Right.
Then your living creature, Matthew Shipp, just sit and play with basically a dead material.
Exactly.
To make it completely come alive, as if like started to almost like melt into kind of like the gushing energy with you.
I mean, that's the force field that's created between me and this mechanical thing. That's
So it's the same with the Vermeer. Why those paintings had such an amazing allure to people, even Vincent van Gogh. Why it affects us so much? Like, it's just a paint, which that's a mineral and oil, and it's a basic kind of poisonous stuff. And the paper or fabric, what does it mean? But when somebody goes through like a medium and then change the reality of materialism into completely metaphysical thing, that's what I love about art.
And that's my quest.
Yes, I know. Most of the art, 80% in the world are kind of garbage.
I wouldn't go that far.
I will, because especially visual art for me, it's too much material waste and so much poisonous stuff. And the piano, it's a beautiful instrument that you can play it again and again.
Right.
But the painters, they throw away so much poisonous stuff into the, waste system. And can you imagine it's all going to this? Most of the paints are mostly poisonous.
That's true. The thing about music is at least that it's functional in another way. So there's a kind of a time and a place for every expression.
Yeah.
Which I love listening to. Art Tatum. There's a story. Billy Taylor, the pianist, used to tell that because he was a disciple, or not a disciple, but he was. That's funny. The story we had about a conversation we had about Billy Taylor. This is another aspect of it. Yeah. He was a friend, close to Art Tatum, and they went to hear a cocktail pianist once that Billy Taylor really thought was horrible. And he said Art Tatum was listening closely and really enjoying it. And he was like, what's come on, let's get out of here. And I'm like, no. And so then he said that a couple nights later, he heard Art Tatum play, and Art Tatum incorporated something that he had heard. So, I mean, the lesson being that there's even this guy who, according to Billy Taylor, was a horrible cocktail pianist, had something to say that that Art Tatum really appreciated and imbibed and incorporated in his thing. But anyway, yes, I want to make the instrument come alive. Yes. I also feel that there is a spirit in me, my angel, you could call it my muse. I have called him Mr. Chromosome.
I remember.
And he's an angel. I talk to him. I don't know if he has a gender. It's because I see it as light and assuming the forms, because we are enculturated. I'm enculturated into Christianity, so I tend to view angels in the Christian iconography.
Yeah, actually, I enjoyed all those, the so-called faith. We don't have it in the Buddhism. It's not a so-called. There's no God.
Right, in Buddhism, right.
So it's a completely different kind of spiritual.
There's no not God either in Buddhism. Right. I mean, the word doesn't even make sense.
Right. It's a completely different philosophical kind of challenge. But I love this Christian iconography, and then the angels and cross and all those things. I really kind of appreciate exploring in my own way.
Right.
And also I love. Finally, as I get older, I finally realizing what faith means, because in Buddhism we don't have that concept.
Right.
It's so interesting. So, but you do need to have a clear sense of faith to survive through with no reward, no nothing, and just do believing in your own whatever you do. It's you really do need sense of faith. Yes.
Or just craziness, like, man.
Yeah.
Like I've never. I mean, I you know, or whatever. I mean, whatever drives you to have that focus.
Yeah.
You know, like
But it's so.
I don't know what drove Van Gogh.
Yeah.
After a life of being completely ignored.
Yes.
By everybody, and it's so funny to watch his paintings sell for millions and millions of dollars.
Yes, I know.
When you couldn't sell one painting.
Steve and I went to the last place he died.
Right.
I that was my dream, to visit his attic, galette room in France, and then his room was like basically this room. That's all he had. The bed and no window in his room, and then he died there. And it's what drove him to do such a thing. But he did have. I don't know. I went all over the place, and I kind of lost my thought. But it's quite incredible. No matter what happened, he worked so hard. But the more he worked harder he worked. He uses money, which his brother gave, and all those material goes away, and he doesn't sell. So he's like an amazing creator, producer of his art, but nothing moves. So he's so much in pain about not making money.
Right.
All through his life. That was one of his, especially, they come from the, old time that man has to make a living thing.
Right.
So I think he had a really tortured kind of tortured feelings in
right. Well, especially if your brother or something can afford to. Yeah, I mean, there must be some, not guilt, but there must be some weird feelings of I mean, dealing with all this and then dealing with the construct of making a living is a whole different conversation. Yeah. And it gets very interesting when you start talking about that, because I having known some older musicians in the quote avant-garde who did pretty decently, but who people think of in certain terms of, I know what their attitude was about dealing with the monetary aspect of all this, and it just gets very, very, very interesting. It's a conversation that I really that can't be dealt with, But one thing I do in a short period of time, I do want to ask you, because we were talking about jazz, we were talking about earlier non-definition, we were talking about you and your husband's being on the scene, having known a lot of people, dealt with a lot of people from different idioms. One thing in the history books that's not talked about a lot is your husband, as a poet that did not want to be defined, as a beat poet or a jazz poet.
He didn't even want to be called a poet.
Right.
He used to get mad at me whenever I said, this is Steve, he's a poet. He said, I'm not a poet. And then he said, I just write poems occasionally or something like that. He doesn't like any labeling.
Right. Well, what's interesting as, when I first met Steve, wasn't even at a concert. I was walking down Spring Street and he was selling books on the street.
Yes.
And records.
Yeah.
So we started talking and I started stopping by.
Right. I know. That's how we
really every day to talk to him. And in that same mode where he was standing out in Soho selling books and albums, he was a mentor to Basquiat about jazz in a lot of ways.
Actually, that's true, right? Yes, Steve tried to tell them this story, and sometimes people write about it, but Basquiat, we know him because one of our best friends was Basquiat, almost like a sister. not the real sister, but he was like a 19, and our friend Janice was like more like his sister. So he always followed her around, and Steve, and he didn't know anything about jazz then, So Steve was already selling jazz stuff, and he was afraid of Steve, but Steve really kind of explained the basic, and so when Steve introduced him to Charlie Parker, and then he painted, the bird, and said, "Oh, look, he painted this," and also right before he died, he came to ask Steve. This is like a really amazing story. Almost 10 days or 2 weeks before he died, he looked really bad, and then he came to Steve specifically to ask one question. He wanted to get Coleman Hawkins' Picasso.
Right.
And then Steve said, "Oh, that's..." Samuel thought that was an album, but then Steve said that's just a piece in the album. So, you can get it easy. And he said, no, I want it now. So Steve said, "You see, you always like this. You never learn." He was yelling at him. "If you are a nice kid, I will help you more, but you're not a nice kid, so I won't." But anyway, he said, "I want it now." So Steve said, "Oh, I don't have it now, but I have it in my collection." Then just Basquiat said, "Oh, I want your record. Go home and get it for me." So he said, and that's... I always liked you, but the one thing I didn't like was your arrogance,
Right.
And then said, "It's okay. I'm not selling my record, That's my record, and I'm not selling it. But this is a good one. You have to learn more about Roland Kirk. You don't know anything about Roland Kirk." So Steve had a Roland Kirk record on the
Right.
street. So he said, "This is very good. This is very good." And said, finally he bought the record and he left.
Right.
And then 2 weeks later he died.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, your story about him saying "I want it now" is very reminiscent of a friend of mine who almost bought a painting of his before he was famous,
Right.
and was going to buy it for $300, but John Michel came over his house and wanted the money now,
Yeah.
and it was obvious to my friend
Yes, actually,
why he needed the money. So my friend freaked, kind of.
Yeah.
My friend, by the way, who
Yeah.
I'm talking. My friend kind of said he was like backed off
Actually,
and canceled the whole thing, which he regrets now.
Yes, actually, Samo we used to call him Samo, although, he was Jean-Michel. But he used to sell his postcards right next to Steve when Steve was selling records and stuff. He was across the street. So anyway, if we bought one a postcard from him, it's $250,000. So Steve used to chase me away and say, "Don't sell your stuff in front of me, blah, blah." So Steve was always saying, I think he cursed me. I will never get any money. But anyway, so it's just a very tragic. I mean, he's being exploited after death. He pushed himself to be exploited. So that's why he jumped into this Warhol circle and all those things. But
well, they needed each other.
yes,
I'm not going to jump on the bandwagon.
I know they needed each other because Warhol was, now he's so big, but he was kind of like a declining in a identity too then. So when Samo came, they really needed each other. We used to watch them on cable TV all the time. They had a TV show.
Well, there was that. Yeah, there's also there's a cable TV show where John Michel's being, I think he was, at the time, he was still Samo.
Yeah.
And it was right after the Soho thing, the Samo thing came out in the Village Voice. And I think he was, if I remember correctly, he was interviewed. And it's kind of a funny clip.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, Steve's seen, you and Steve have kind of seen it all. You've seen the development.
And what's that?
You've seen and the degradation of a lot of people and things.
Actually, I was very lucky because it's incredible how much great music I took in, how many great art shows I saw, and I always say, New York City is, for me, it's like a kind of big university. I didn't have most of the places, we don't have to pay expensive money to see, art and other things. So I studied so much over many, many years, and it was like a great. And I really felt, at one point, I felt like a really, No, I feel like I have a doctor's degree from Harvard. No, seriously, I really felt like I kind of learned so much.
Right.
You know, most of the school wouldn't teach you.
Right. Well, that's why I don't
That's
feel
the
like I
whole
have
point.
a doctor's degree from Harvard, because
Yes.
what I know, no school could teach
Exactly.
and or get near.
Because of
So
the weird thing about academy, you know, I'm not against academy. Academy is very important because they are the guardian of history. But like I said, history. So unless you become a valuable history, they will never pay attention when it's happening. So for example, when Matthew is really trying to, you know, move on with his own path, no academicians will be interested unless he's known. He's written by New York Times and this and that. You know, social stamp is down because there's no social capital values because it's all about market now. So, you know, when what we do is a completely anti-market, basically, you know, so.
well, I'm not anti-market. I'm just plain. I mean, no, I mean, that's my point.
You don't sell yourself. That's
Oh,
what
I do. No, I think I think I have a, I mean, I have a sense of how to put myself in the middle of things and get people to. I'm good at getting people to pay attention to me.
Okay, that's
I'm the type, like Muhammad Ali once said when he was a kid, that he figured out if he ran. I don't remember where I saw. I vaguely remember this quote or the flavor of it. He said if I ran home next to the school bus, more people would pay attention to me than if I got on the school bus. You know, so I would say in my own case, I've always had a sense of knowing how to get people to know I'm there. I mean, you know, and I've been able to kind of.
But you paid the dues already. When you came to New York, your career already started when you were a child.
Right. Well, I mean, at the same time, I'm very serious about what I do.
Yes.
There's zero pretense as far as the art goes.
I know.
And then I'm just determined that like I'm not going to let anybody else push me to the ground. Mm-hmm. So if anybody gets in my way, metaphorically speaking, they are going to be destroyed. You know, I mean, metaphorically. No, and I feel that I've always felt that way about the jazz industry or anything. If anyone gets in my way, they are going to metaphorically, in some way, pay a price for it. And I'm not going to have my fate decided by them. At the same time, you know, I let the work carry everything for it. But when I moved to New York, I mean, I moved into the Lower East Side, and my scene was
great time then.
Yeah, it was a great time in the early '80s. But the scene of musicians I was involved in is a scene that might be known as nowadays as a Vision Festival scene.
Right.
So a bunch of musicians in the Lower East Side, like William Parker, Daniel Carter, Roy Campbell, Jamil Moomdock,
great.
Who, when I moved, you know, the jazz industry was paying zero attention.
Exactly.
Zero. I mean, everything at that time was either, well, everything was kind of when it was that, you know, the neoconservative movement in jazz at that time. And then apart from that, everything, if you were downtown avant-gardists, it was all like kind of white avant-gardists, which a lot of the practitioners of that are people I admire. I moved to New York in the early '80s in the midst of a scene that zero attention was being paid to people like William Parker or Roy Campbell. Or
so people like Steve kept on writing about Charles Gayle's book, and then almost 20 years, early years, 5 people, 6 people, even William, you know,
right.
Nobody really paid attention. And then when you think about it now, you know, he's like a hero.
Right. Well, Williams, like
it took like almost more than 40 years of their involvement with the community and all those devotions.
Right.
You know, it took so long, yeah.
Right.
But that's how it goes because mainstream media is always like that. You know, it's always, very conservative.
Right. Well, it took, for the Lower East Side, quote, Vision Fest scene to start getting some national attention, it took a couple things. A, it took for the neoconservative music and jazz to play itself out a little bit.
Yes.
So, I mean, once people say, well, okay, this is cool, what's going on, it's time to... I mean, not that it, quote, played itself out, but it took... for the scene to start getting recorded, and there were no American labels doing that, so a Swedish label called So-Called Records came along and started recording basically just that scene.
That's right, I know, but that's the tradition of so-called jazz.
Right.
All the great jazz people has to go to Europe.
Right. Or Europeans with some money.
Right. It helps them. Right. I know.
Would have, so that label, who was at the time bankrolled by a banker in Europe, was able to start recording the scene, and it, people start paying a slight, backhanded compliments and a little attention. And then it took for a movement that happened in the early 90s. A lot of people in the punk rock world started kind of getting enthralled with free jazz or this scene, and started kind of being sponsored. So Henry Rollins,
I still remember,
the poet and punk rock musician, became a sponsor and a patron of me. I mean, he produced some of my and Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth
I was just saying,
started being with William Hooker and things. So once a lot of people in the quote alternative rock world started talking about our scene and actually putting their money where their mouth is, at some point we started getting national prominence.
Because Superstar is paying attention to you.
Right.
Because like people like Thurston, we became very close friends later, but Steve and I didn't know anything because we kept away from punk scene because I don't go there. But anyway, so we didn't know what Sonic Youth was. So then once we find out this Thurston Moore loves the same kind of music we love, so we started to see each other. So finally we went to see Sonic Youth in Summer Stage or something, and then I got so scared because the mashing. You remember?
The mashing, yes, of course.
Oh my God.
I mean, I grew up. I was really into punk music also as a kid, so I know that culture.
I was so frightened, but anyway, so that's always the same because they have more social power.
Right.
So Stars and all those people, they have more social capital power. They kind of endorsed you, and then people pay attention.
Right. Well, the mainstream jazz media started.
Yes, I know.
Paying attention.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's
always
like so pushed to the corner.
Well, we were more than pushed to the corner. We weren't even on the corner. Back. I mean, I really like when you see somebody like Daniel Carter that just gets up day after day and does his thing, and just has, and also I mean, and it has no bitterness.
No.
Too. About it. It's just really amazing to me. And William just, and I often say, I've actually, this is going to sound a little weird, I've actually yet to ever meet a jazz musician that doesn't have any bitterness, because it just comes with the territory. Even if you're successful and making a lot of money, I've always had a joke. I say, to be a jazz musician is to have some bitterness. Maybe that's true of being human.
Yes.
It's just a part of the structure of.
So bitterness.
But I'm not saying that these people don't, because I like when it gets down to it, and when you get in conversations, not people's, even the most, like Dennis Charles, the great drummer, even the most affluent personalities that are just always so positive. Like, if you really get them down, and you get, stuff comes out, So again, even the most successful, in fact, some of the most successful people actually sometimes have more bitterness for whatever reason than anybody else. But I'm just saying, I'm not saying that there's not bitterness in these people's cases, it's just amazing to me.
It's almost like an angelic acceptance of the reality.
Exactly.
And they really,
that's the best way to put it.
They're not even proud or anything. They just accept
just doing their thing.
Yeah, and then they are fine with it.
Right. Daniel Carter just gets up and does his thing.
I know.
Wham has always just kept moving and moving and moving.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's not to say, William's stance as an artist is very militaristic. and he's in a revolutionary mindset.
I know.
And,
He wants to
I mean,
change
without
the
a
world.
doubt. I mean, he's not
wants to
just
change
this.
the world.
He's
I know.
not just this accepting.
No.
You know.
No, I know.
I mean, people look at him
His social political consciousness was very clear. From the
very
beginning.
clear.
That's why they started this Sound Unity,
Right.
and then Improvised Collective, and then Vision Festival. It's all connected with their own Patricia and
Right.
William's socio-political consciousness.
Right.
you know?
So I'm not going to say that with some. There's a lot of things that drive people. There's a lot of things that enter the soup or the equation of their mental construct, and there's a lot of nobody can ever get involved, really understand what their motivations are, and bitterness is a part of it.
That's another thing.
So
Yeah. For some reason, one of our good friend, poet Danny Schott, wrote a poem for this tribes thing in the biennial for Whitney, and one part of the poem was like everybody gets rejected. The poetry is the same. No, unless you're a super academic famous writer, we don't make a penny. Really, like poetry is like a no money word and it's always rejected. So Danny Schott used the word not embittered even by all those negative pressure from us. So
right.
People fall into bitterness, but one thing I really loved about Vision Festival people, everybody in our circle, they're such almost like even Roy Campbell, right before he passed away. Steve, he had a long last show in something, so it was after 12, and he has to go back to Bronx. So Steve was so worried and said, "Roy, you should stop doing this," And then Roy was packing up the stuff and said, "Oh, this is my life. I'm okay," And then this still with such a joyful kind of spirit.
When he played, yes. I mean, I was close friends with Roy.
I know.
He could be very.
He was complaining.
He was very
angry.
He could be very angry. Yes. I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat. I don't want to sugarcoat anything and pretend that because you see,
No, when I say they're not bitter, I'm not saying they're not angry. I'm angry too. But it doesn't. Embitterness doesn't crush them down.
Right. Well, no, it definitely
didn't.
It
is. It almost like it makes them stronger.
Yeah, or it makes them like more resolute.
Exactly.
And not resolute in the fact, because earlier in this conversation I talked about myself being resolute in the fact that anybody in this industry who is ever tried to get in my way is going to metaphorically somehow pay a price for that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, I'm not. I don't believe in violence, but
yes, I know.
But it might make them, some like Roy, more resolute within the music, and I would tend to think I'm like that myself, even though I do have an ambition within the industry, to make sure that I want people to at least
listen to
listen to me and have access to my point of view, and
so
then
they can attack you.
So they can attack me or love me,
Right. At
or
least to pay attention.
acknowledge, at least that they know I exist.
They give themselves up to listen to you.
Yeah, and I realized early on that I would have to do some work to make that happen. That wasn't going to happen. Nobody, when I first moved to New York, part of my delusional, and I'm not delusional, but part of my mindset was I thought I was going to get off the train and that there were people there greeting me. That you're the next thing, come on, we got a record deal for you and all that. And you knew me then, needless to say.
I know.
There was years nothing happened. I mean, that didn't happen, needless to say. But I remember having a talk with James Blood Armor.
Yes.
Who you're really close friends with.
Yes.
He lives in Soho.
He lives in Spring Street. So
right, and it was right around you, and I
we
remember.
Used to hang out
I used to see you hanging out. You and Steve hang out with Blood Armor. Yeah. Before I had.
He was a preacher's son.
Yeah, I believe it. So I remember talking to him once, and then I saw him. I didn't see him for a few years, right? And I saw him at a festival, and he looks at me. He goes, "Hey, Shipp." And I'm like, "Oh, Blood Armor." He goes, "Remember that last time we talked? you didn't have an album out and you were trying to ask me like how do you get critics to notice you and how do you get people to write about you and to notice you? Because look at him, he goes, you've done figured it out. I never forget. So I said, yeah, you know, I've done some networking, yeah. But anyway, and I'll never forget the look on his face. He goes, hey, you done figured it out. But
He was impressed.
oh, it was the comic aspect of how he said that to me. But anyway, yeah,
Actually, one good thing is you're very responsible to your own art.
And what do you mean by that?
Like you know this is what you do is very important. So you
Well,
never,
I think it's important.
yeah. So yes. Yeah. So then you took care of it.
Right. I mean, I maybe I'm completely delusional.
Yeah, because
but I think it's
Steve
important.
was so mad at me because I think what I do is very important.
Right.
But I just keep them in the storage. I never
Right.
show them.
Oh, he used to say
He
to
was
me.
very.
He used to say to me, "Yeah, Yuko's the real poet in the family."
And even artwork, you know,
Right.
I never show my work, and it's, you know, I kind of gave up on the whole thing. But you know, at least you challenged, and you kind of, like almost like you figure things out.
Well, I mean, maybe my mother.
It was quite amazing.
Maybe my mother said too many nice things to me as a kid. I just. No, I'm just saying that I just really trust my instincts and think that I know who I should be in the world, and that, you know, I just never doubted that, you know. And I have friends who think that of me too, but like are always kind of taken back by my self-assuredness of all those within that realm.
Actually,
Yes.
your parents are remarkable people.
Yeah, they were both very cool,
Very,
very.
very
I mean, they're my favorite people. I mean, they're both
Yes,
deceased now.
and they really gave you some foundation of your personality in such a way. So
Right.
you are like a so-called confidence is not like came later, but you are given some kind of self-assurance.
Right.
since you were
Oh, they
a
were.
child.
I mean, but they were also rough on me. I mean,
Yes, I know.
I mean-
They gave you so much.
right. I
real
mean, not
love.
rough on me. I mean, they were very
love.
like you know, they're practical people. I mean, my mother was very had her head in the clouds in a good way, a lot of ways. But I mean, I just imagine, like, I remember my father. I mean, because my parents knew Monk. They had met him.
Right.
Because when he got arrested, I'm from Wilmington, Delaware. When he got arrested in Delaware, the person that
Oh, really?
was his lawyer, it was a family friend, and they got to meet him, and they knew a lot about him. My mother was fascinated by him. She wasn't particularly, like, it wasn't her favorite music. Like, you know, she would listen to Earl Gardner
Right.
before or Ahmad Jamal before she would listen to Monk. But I mean, that's a big thing, having parents into Earl Gardner and Ahmad Jamal too. I mean, I'm not.
That's very special.
Right. But they have Monk albums, even though like that. But she was very fascinated by his idiosyncratic nature and the fact that he was kind of this guy that did his own thing. You know, she really kind of got all that. So she used to bring him up a lot, that, you know, he was kind of this slightly crazy guy that did his own thing and didn't care what the world think, and the world came to him. And so I was, you know, and she was really fascinated by that aspect of him. And my father got that too. But can you imagine when I finally sat down with my father when I was like 17 and told him, you know, I want to move to New York. I want to be a composer, and I want to do my own music. And like Monk, I want to be. I mean, my father didn't drink, but I saw the look on his face.
What kind of look?
Yeah, like he needed a drink. I mean, you know, he might have actually gone and got it, you know, because we had a kind of a liquor cabinet for visitors.
Especially your only child.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I just know that that's not what any parents dream of their kids doing. You know, let's just leave it at that. So they were very supportive of anything. I mean, they saw how hard I worked. And I think they saw that I was kind of a, quote, entrepreneur from the time I was like 12, because I started doing all kinds of things. Like I was assistant organist at my church.
So you had that.
And I when I was a teenager, you know, I played cocktail, and I always kind of made money, even as a 13, 14-year-old.
Good.
You know, I was always very focused about business, and they saw that. So I think they had faith that
You can do it. You can
Yeah,
do it.
I would never starve. You know, because I had people telling me not only I had people telling me, oh, hey, if you're going to be a musician, you're going to starve to death. So
Especially avant-garde.
And then on top of that, I've had people who were really into music saying, if you do the type of music you want to do, just get ready to starve.
Right.
And I was always like, no, I'm not going to starve. I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it somehow. And if, by hook or crook, somehow I'm going to make it. And people would always say, like, how can you be so sure? And I would say, well, Cecil Taylor makes a living at music. Yeah, but that's Cecil Taylor. I said, well, who cares? What do you mean that's Cecil Taylor? I'm as good as he or a bit better. Who is he? He's a guy that did his thing and stuck by it and eventually made it.
The first person with the piano, when the piano became organic being, piano itself, that was Cecil. When I first saw him, I said, this is really like a phenomenon. Am I dreaming or what? But I always knew you be when Cecil, we love you, Cecil, but when he goes, I know you're going to be the one to kind of become focused.
Right. Well, I love Cecil Taylor.
I know. But I still remember. Right. You remember? So many pianists fell into Cecil's mode. Right. Everybody started to play like Cecil. A la Cecil kind of playing. But I still remember you said, I hate Cecil. You're trying yourself so much.
Well, that was, I had creative license to do that because I knew he was a dead end. And if you try, that his language is so personal that if you try, and also my hatred of him back then was out of respect.
I know exactly.
And as you know, I was actually kind of friends with him for a while. We had a big fallout. Because I like Bill Evans and he hates him and he considered that an affront to him that somebody who but
no, but I thought it was great.
I just want to go back thinking about the thing about making a living, that when I moved here, I was willing to I worked as a messenger.
Oh, you did messenger?
Yeah, I worked as an art school model.
Right, I remember. I saw the painting.
That's portrait.
Portrait. Yes,
that Andy.
I think I kept it.
Yeah, he's using it to promote his art class, that he did a portrait of me. I worked in bookstores at Strand and at Barnes and Noble. I was willing to really. I still remember the day. I never felt okay, even though I said that I always knew I was going to make a living at this. I never thought the world owed it to me because I know that like half the great artists we know died of starvation. So when I told my father that I wanted to do this for a living, I think if I recall, he said to me, son, Mozart was one of the greatest geniuses ever, and he died of starvation. Right. I think I remember. I just said, well, that's, if you're going to be an artist, that's the risk you take.
Steve's father said the same thing.
Right. That's just...
If you write poetry or something, or artist, and you're going to be a Bowery bum.
Right.
So before he passed away, Steve said, Dad, you can't even be a Bowery bum. It's too expensive.
Right, nowadays, yeah. No, but that's, I just remember saying,
I know.
That's the risk you take. And my mother was always trying to well, you should finish your degree so you can teach. And I dropped out of school. I'm like, no, I'm not. I don't want any safety nets. I'm going to go out here.
And also, your world is started to, like a tree. It's already growing. So you can't take in other people's ideas. So your idea is already growing out of you.
Right. Well, yeah, I always... That the tree is the ultimate. You use the right metaphor.
I always use
and the tree is the right metaphor for everything. Herman Hesse has a great essay on trees. Yes. Trees are our greatest teachers.
It's so interesting. I wonder how many young kids read Herman Hesse, because I read in Japanese translation. Right. You read in English. Steve read all his stuff. It's very important for us, Hesse.
Right.
But for this generation, I don't know.
I don't know what people.
Yeah, the tree.
Trees are trees to me are the metaphor.
Yes, I think about everything.
That's all I think about are trees.
Yes.
Joe, the great guitarist Joe Morris, actually was joking to me once. He said, you don't need to read as many books as you had. If you want to learn everything, you just need to sit and stare at a tree.
What?
Joe Morris once said to me that you don't need to read as many books as you have. You just need to like sit and stare at a tree,
Right.
and you can learn everything. And I said that's
Exactly
true.
I know. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very fascinating. Yes.
But I just again, I didn't think the world owed me anything, even though in a certain militant aspect, I think like I had to make it, which, what does that mean to make it? I remember when I first moved to New York, I became really close friends with Billy Bang.
Billy Bang, another person.
Right, just because I saw him on the street the second day I was in New York, and I just stopped. And we actually started having lunch together and stuff. And he was headed out to Europe to do some festivals. And he was saying, like, yeah, man, I'll see you. I'll be back in a week. He goes, yeah. And then he said to me, I'm going to make it. You'll see.
He said that?
Yeah, he said that. And I'm like thinking, like, what's he talking about? He's headlining some... And, it took me before when I got my foot in the door, I saw what he meant. You never feel like you've made... I mean, you can be like playing this festival, recording for this level, and you still feel like you're fighting the jazz business.
I know, yes.
So, because it was just like, I'm like, what is he talking about? I'm going to make it. You'll see. He's like, like I would at the time love to be like, say, I'm going to Europe to do a festival. But it took me a few years. I understood what he meant. And I still feel like you're fighting and I, have a worldwide name now. Extremely well recorded. Have had, and
at this moment, yes.
But I still, you still feel like you're fighting the powers that be. I mean, because despite all the critical acclaim I've got, which is massive, actually, there's still like I could email certain festivals and they won't return my email. And you would think that out of respect for
now?
Yeah, even now, you would think out of respect for who you are, they would just
ghost you.
They don't. I mean, maybe they get so many emails that they don't. But I'm just saying
that happens a lot. But that's the worst.
Yeah. So
at least they could have said, "Oh, I'm sorry."
Yeah, we can't do anything.
I know. Say something.
Right. But anyway, I just tell younger people asking me for advice to never take anything personally like that because,
But it's certain manners they should have.
Right. Oh, you would think.
Yes.
You would think. Yeah.
Because, I know. Oh, what do you think?
I don't think. I'm trying just to get through the day.
Yes.
Right.
How long did we talk?
Almost 2 hours.
Oh, really?
Oh, 15 minutes went to 2 hours.
Anyway, that's all I had.
That's okay?
Oh, it's amazing.
Right. There's a lot of good stuff in there, so Okay.
That was okay?
It was great.
Yes.
Absolutely beautiful.